30 people yelled surprise in my living room at 8:14 p.m. By 8:15 p.m., my 20-year marriage was dead on the hardwood floor. I planned my husband's 50th birthday party down to the last napkin. Instead of a celebration, I bought myself a front row seat to my own destruction. We were crouching in the dark of my Atlanta home. 30 of our closest friends were holding their breath. The air smelled heavily of vanilla cake and expensive champagne. My knees were aching from hiding behind the custom velvet sofa. 2 months ago, I was sketching out the party layout. Blythe, my business partner and best friend of 15 years, kept pushing for a massive guest list. I thought she was just being a wonderful friend. I didn't know she was setting the stage for a nightmare. It was exactly 8:14 p.m. when I heard the key in the lock. The heavy brass lock clicked. The custom oak door swung inward. The smart home system instantly flicked on the bright foyer overheads. 30 people leapt up from behind the furniture. We all screamed, "Surprise!" at the exact same time. And then, dead, suffocating silence. Langston stood on the Persian rug. He dropped his keys. They hit the floor with a sharp, sickening crack. He wasn't alone. There was a woman standing right next to him. She had long dark hair and a cheap beige trench coat. Her hand was gripping the shoulder of a boy holding a bright blue handmade birthday card. I stepped out from behind the sofa. I stared at the boy's face under the harsh overhead light. My hands went completely numb. He was 9 years old. He had Langston's exact square jawline. He had Langston's deep, unmistakable brown eyes. He was a carbon copy, a living proof of a double life, standing right in my foyer. I know now what happened right before that door opened. I checked the doorbell camera logs the next morning. The footage shows Langston pausing on the porch. He looks panicked. The woman and the child step up behind him. Langston doesn't push them away. Instead, he reaches out. He grabs the woman's hand. He squeezes her fingers right before he unlocks my front door. But in that moment, I didn't know any of that. I just felt my heartbeat hammering in my throat. Then I heard glass shatter. I snapped my head to the right. Blythe had dropped her crystal wine glass. It smashed into 100 sparkling pieces on the imported tile. She was staring dead at the woman in the trench coat. Her face was completely drained of color. She didn't look confused. She looked caught. She dropped that glass before the boy even spoke. I looked slowly back toward the foyer. The little boy looked up at the 30 silent strangers. He clutched his blue handmade card to his chest. Then he tugged my husband's sleeve and said the 3 words that ended my life. "Happy birthday, Daddy." 3 words. That's all it took to demolish 20 years of marriage. The little boy held up the bright blue construction paper card. His dark brown eyes locked onto my husband. My living room went completely dead silent. The jazz music was still playing from the ceiling speakers. It sounded like a funeral dirge. I checked the hidden living room security camera footage later that night. The timestamp clearly said 8:16 p.m. You can actually see 30 people stop breathing at the exact same time. Guests were awkwardly backing away toward the kitchen. They were quietly putting down their crystal wine glasses on my custom oak tables. Everyone was desperately looking for the nearest exit without making eye contact. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Langston's face lost all its color. He looked like a corpse, standing in a tailored suit. He immediately put his hands on the woman's cheap beige trench coat. He tried to physically push her and the boy back out the front door. "It's a huge misunderstanding," he stammered. His voice was shaking uncontrollably. "You need to leave right now." I didn't freeze. My hands were trembling, but my feet moved on their own. I stepped forward into the cold air of the foyer. I reached right past my husband's shoulder. I snatched that bright blue card directly from the little boy's hands. The paper felt rough against my fingers. Langston reached into his jacket pocket for his phone. I lunged to grab it first. Suddenly, a splash of cold red wine hit my silk blouse. The dark liquid soaked right through to my skin. Blythe had dropped her glass. She stepped right between me and Langston. She was physically blocking my body from getting to his phone. I thought it was a clumsy accident. It wasn't. Blythe was actively buying him time. I looked down at the construction paper in my shaking hands. Bile rose in the back of my throat. A physical sickness took over my entire body. My knees actually buckled for a second. There were 3 stick figures drawn in heavy crayon. A man, a woman, and a little boy holding hands. The text at the top was written in jagged blue letters. Happy 50th, Daddy. Love, Mateo. I stared at the stick figure man. He was drawn wearing a bright green scrub cap. It was the exact same green scrub cap Langston wears at the hospital. The math didn't make sense. My mind violently snapped back to 15 years ago. We were sitting in that sterile white room at the fertility clinic. The air in that clinic smelled aggressively like rubbing alcohol and bleach. The paper crinkled under me on the exam table. Langston was holding both of my hands. Tears were streaming down his face. He looked me dead in the eye and told me he was sterile. He swore we would be enough for each other. 15 years of mourning a family we could never have. I built this firm from the ground up to distract myself from that crushing grief. I poured my entire soul into our firm's bank accounts instead of a nursery. I worked 80-hour weeks to numb the pain. And here was Mateo, standing right here in my foyer. He was living, breathing proof of a massive, decade-long lie. The physical resemblance was absolutely terrifying. He had Langston's exact square jawline. You know that feeling when your gut is screaming at you? When your brain tries to reject the evidence? I stood there on the Persian rug holding that blue card. The sweet smell of vanilla cake was nauseating. My chest felt like it was completely caving in. I couldn't catch my breath. The walls of the foyer were spinning. I looked at Langston, expecting him to deny it. Instead, he looked at my best friend, Blythe. He gave her a look of pure, unadulterated panic. 30 people practically sprinted for the custom oak door. No one said goodbye. They just left their crystal wine glasses on my tables. The front door opened and closed like a revolving gate. The silence they left behind was suffocating. My living room suddenly felt like a crime scene. The smell of vanilla cake made my stomach turn. I stood frozen on the Persian rug. My hands went completely cold. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. Langston had practically shoved the woman and the boy outside. I heard the heavy brass lock click into place. He leaned his forehead against the painted wood. He was breathing so hard his shoulders shook. I stared at his back. He was wearing a charcoal-tailored suit. He told me he had a big meeting that ran late. Who wears a bespoke suit to a late-night hospital meeting? The math didn't make sense. The fabric was perfectly pressed. It wasn't wrinkled from a 12-hour shift. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an alert from the driveway security camera. The timestamp said exactly 8:22 p.m. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. The woman in the cheap beige trench coat was still there. She was banging her fists on our front door. I could see her mouth open in a scream. She was sobbing hysterically on my porch. The little boy, Mateo, was standing beside her. He had his hands clamped over his ears. His face was buried in her coat. Langston finally turned around to face me. His skin was the color of wet ash. He held up both hands like he was surrendering to police. He said, "Naila, baby, listen to me." My name sounded like poison in his mouth. He told me her name was Catalina. He claimed she was a former patient. He said she was severely mentally unstable. He swore she had developed a dangerous obsession with him. He took a step toward me. I stepped back. He looked me dead in the eye. He said, "That boy is not mine." I didn't blink. I didn't cry. I just held out my hand. I told him to give me his phone. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. His hand hovered over his suit pocket. He pulled the device out slowly. Just as he did, the screen lit up. I saw it clearly before he could hide it. 14 missed calls. The contact name was saved as CR Emergency. But the picture wasn't a hospital logo. It was a selfie. Langston and Catalina smiling on a white sand beach. The sun was shining on their faces. I lunged for the phone. My fingers almost brushed the glass, but Blythe moved faster. She stepped right between us. Her designer heel caught on the edge of the Persian rug. She stumbled forward with a loud, dramatic gasp. Her hand smacked hard against Langston's wrist. The phone flew through the air. It skittered across the polished hardwood floor. It vanished straight under the heavy oak credenza. Blythe immediately started apologizing. She was touching Langston's arm. She asked him if he was okay. My confusion instantly morphed into a sharp, hyper-vigilant suspicion. I remembered a conversation from 3 years ago. We were sitting in my firm's conference room. I had been worried about Langston's late nights. Blythe had rolled her eyes and poured me coffee. She told me doctors just work crazy hours. She said I was being paranoid about his schedule. Now she was standing in my foyer. She was physically shielding a liar. Langston was still talking. His voice was frantic. He was desperately trying to sell his story. He swore on his mother's grave it was a delusion. But I am an architect. I built this from the ground up. I noticed details. And I noticed the matching gold bracelets on both of their wrists. I stared at Blythe's wrist. Then I looked at Langston's. Matching solid gold Cartier cuffs. The math didn't make sense. Why did my husband and my best friend have matching jewelry? Outside, Catalina was still screaming. Her fist pounded violently against my custom oak front door. The heavy brass lock rattled with every single hit. "Langston, let me in!" The remaining 30 guests practically ran to their cars. I watched them scramble down the driveway. Blythe slipped out the back patio door. She didn't even look at me. She just vanished into the dark. Langston's phone was still glowing under the heavy oak credenza. I could see the screen, lighting up the edge of the Persian rug. 14 missed calls, all from CR Emergency. He dove for it. He snatched the phone off the floor and shoved it deep into his suit pocket. His hands were shaking violently. I didn't say a word. I just watched him panic. By 2 a.m., the house was dead silent. The police had finally hauled Catalina away. The sickeningly sweet smell of vanilla cake still hung in the air. It made me sick. I was sitting alone at the kitchen island. The marble countertop was freezing against me. Langston walked in. His charcoal-tailored suit was rumpled. His tie was gone. He looked like a cornered animal. He collapsed onto the hardwood floor, right at my feet. "It was one time, Nyla," he sobbed. "A one-time mistake." He finally dropped the delusional patient lie. He admitted the boy was his. 10 years ago, he choked out. A medical conference in Chicago. I was drunk. I closed my eyes. I remembered that exact trip. It was October 2014. I personally packed his leather suitcase. I folded his shirts. I was so incredibly stupid. He scrambled up from the floor. "I can prove it's just guilt," he pleaded. "I just pay child support. That's it. I don't even see them." He ran down the hall to his home office. I followed him slowly. The room smelled like his expensive cedar cologne. He spun the brass dial. He pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He shoved it into my trembling hands. It was a clinical paternity test from 2014. The logo at the top was faded. I didn't look at the results. I looked at the top left corner. It listed Catalina's home address. She didn't live in Chicago. The address was on Elm Street in Decatur, 20 minutes from my driveway. We went back to the kitchen. It was exactly 2014 a.m. The footage shows exactly what happened next. Langston dropped to his knees again. He buried his wet face in my lap. He wrapped his arms around my legs. I just sat there, perfectly rigid, staring blankly at the white subway tile backsplash. I could feel his hot tears soaking through my silk trousers. My hands were cold. He was begging for forgiveness, promising he never loved her, swearing it was a burden. Have you ever felt your heart completely detached from your body? It is a clarity. He thought his tears were working. He thought I was in shock. But my mind was already doing the math. I manage every single joint bank account. How do you pay 9 years of child support without me noticing a missing dime? I left Langston crying on the custom velvet sofa in the living room. I didn't feel a single ounce of pity. My brain was already moving 3 steps ahead. It was 3:15 a.m. I walked down the hall to my home office. I shut the heavy oak door and locked it. The heavy brass lock clicked into place. The house was dead quiet. I sat down at my glass desk. I opened my laptop. The harsh white screen lit up my face in the dark room. I had to find the money. 9 years of hidden child support is a massive financial leak. The math didn't make sense. I logged into our joint bank accounts at Chase. I checked his hospital's salary deposits. I went through 36 months of statements. Every single dollar was there. His paycheck was completely untouched. Our savings were fully intact. He wasn't paying for Mateo from our personal funds. My hands gripped the cold edge of the glass desk. I sat in that leather chair for 3 solid hours. I watched the sky turn a sickly gray through the window. The digital clock on my desk flipped to 6:10 a.m. I walked to the kitchen and made black coffee. The bitter steam burned my nose. I carried the ceramic mug back to my office. I set it down next to my keyboard. If the money wasn't coming from our personal accounts, it had to be coming from somewhere else. My firm. I built this from the ground up. I opened a new secure tab. I logged into my architecture firm's business accounts. I pulled up the QuickBooks dashboard. My hands were shaking so hard I mistyped my password twice. I finally got in. I navigated to the vendor payout screen. I started scrolling through the recurring monthly invoices. I saw the usual approved names: steel suppliers, blueprint printing services, city permit expediters. Then a strange vendor profile caught my eye: Apex Consulting LLC. I had never hired a consultant by that name. I clicked on the vendor profile. The screen loaded a long list of outgoing payments. A flat fee, $4,500 every single month. My chest got incredibly tight. I couldn't pull enough air into my lungs. I sorted the payment history by the oldest date. The very first invoice was paid exactly 6 years ago. I did the math in my head. $54,000 a year. Over $320,000 total. Bled directly from my firm's operating account. A memory hit me so hard I felt physically dizzy. 6 years ago, we had just landed the massive Midtown high-rise project. I was completely drowning in structural blueprints. Blythe walked into my office. She handed me a vanilla latte. I can still remember the sweet, artificial smell of the vanilla. She smiled at me. She said, "You focus on the designs. Let me handle the boring vendor invoices." I thanked her. I thought she was saving my life. I let her take over the accounting. She was my business partner. She was my best friend. I trusted her blindly. I looked back at the glaring QuickBooks dashboard. Blythe always approved the Apex Consulting invoices personally. She insisted on it. She told me it was a complex vendor file. She said she was doing it to save me time. She was the one physically clicking the approval button. Month after month, year after year, she was funneling my company's money out the door. There is a hidden security camera on my office bookshelf. It captured everything. The timestamp on the footage reads exactly 6:42 a.m. You can see the exact moment my reality snapped. The blue light from the laptop was shining on my face. I stopped looking tired. I looked horrified. My jaw locked tight. I could feel my heartbeat hammering in my throat. I had to know who was cashing these stolen checks. I assumed Langston had set up a dummy shell company. I opened another browser window. I pulled up the Georgia State Business Registry. My fingers hammered against the keyboard. I typed in Apex Consulting LLC. I hit enter. The search results populated on the screen. I scrolled down to the legal filings. I found the original incorporation document. I clicked the PDF link. I zoomed in on the registered agent section. The name on the screen wasn't Langston. It was a woman named Catalina Rojas. I stared at the glowing laptop screen. Catalina Rojas, registered agent. The black letters burned into my retinas. My lungs simply stopped working. I couldn't pull in a single breath of air. The math finally made sense. The betrayal was absolute. I pushed my chair back from the glass desk. My knees popped loudly in the quiet home office. I walked over to the doorway and held my breath. I listened to the dark hallway. Nothing but heavy silence. Langston was still passed out in the living room. He was right where I left him 3.5 hours ago, curled up on my custom velvet sofa like a victim. I wasn't going to wake him. I walked back to the computer. I looked closer at the PDF. There was a physical address listed under Catalina's name. It wasn't a sterile P.O. box. It wasn't a shady corporate mailbox. It was a real residential address. 402 Elma Drive, Decatur. My hand shook as I hit the print command. The laser printer hummed to life in the corner. A single warm sheet of paper slid out into the tray. The official Georgia Secretary of State business registration. Apex Consulting LLC. It was the blueprint of my financial ruin. I folded it sharply and shoved it into my coat pocket. I walked into the kitchen. The smell of stale vanilla cake still hung in the air from last night. It made me violently nauseous. I grabbed my car keys off the marble kitchen island. The metal was freezing cold against my palm. I pulled out my phone. The screen cast a harsh white light in the dark room. I typed a quick text to Langston. Going to the office early to deal with the fallout. I hit send. It was a complete lie. I wasn't going anywhere near the firm. I had a different destination. By 7:15 a.m., I was locked inside my car. The printed LLC document sat face up on the passenger seat. My knuckles were completely white. I gripped the leather steering wheel so hard my fingers ached. I threw the car to drive. I headed straight out of Atlanta. I drove toward Decatur. Decatur. The name echoed in my empty car. A very specific memory flashed behind my eyes. It was 4 years ago. Langston and I were driving through this exact area. We were dressed up for a charity gala. I was wearing a silk blouse. We had taken a detour to avoid a massive wreck on I-80. I remembered Langston getting strangely nervous. He kept checking his mirrors. His right leg was bouncing up and down aggressively. He kept insisting we get back on the highway immediately. He claimed he hated the suburban back roads. He said they made him claustrophobic. I thought he was just being an impatient driver. I was so incredibly stupid. He was terrified I would see his second life. The dashboard clock glowed bright blue. 07:55 a.m. I turned the wheel sharply. The tires crunched onto a quiet, affluent suburban street. Elmwood Drive. The morning sun was just hitting the perfectly manicured lawns. My stomach twisted into tight, painful knots. I could feel my heartbeat hammering in my throat. You know that feeling when your gut is screaming at you, but your brain keeps begging for another explanation? I wanted her to live in a dump. I wanted this to be some cheap, pathetic mistake. I wanted to find a run-down duplex. I slowed the car down to a crawl. The brass numbers on the brick mailboxes ticked up. 400, 400, 402. I slammed on the brakes. The car jerked to a violent stop. I threw it into park. I just sat there staring through the windshield. A crushing wave of reality slammed into my chest. There was a little red bicycle lying in the front yard. A 9-year-old boy's bicycle. The grass was perfectly cut. I couldn't look away from the property. It wasn't a dirty little apartment. It was a beautiful 4-bedroom craftsman home, and parked in the driveway was my husband's stolen Mercedes from 3 years ago. I didn't drive away. I didn't pull out my phone to take a picture of the stolen Mercedes. I just opened my car door. My boots hit the wet asphalt. The morning air was freezing. I slammed the door shut. I walked straight up the concrete driveway of 402 Elmwood Drive. My heart wasn't racing anymore. It was beating in slow, heavy thuds. I could feel it in my teeth. I stepped onto the wide brick porch. The welcome mat had a stupid little painted sunflower on it. I stopped right in front of the doorbell camera. It was exactly 08:02 a.m. The little blue ring lit up. It was recording my face. I didn't care. Let them watch. Before I rang the bell, I pulled out my phone. My fingers were stiff from the cold. I opened the county tax assessor's website. I typed in the street numbers. The page loaded slowly. I stared at the bright white screen. The property deed details popped up. Owner names, Langston Hughes and Catalina Rojas. Purchase date, October 2018. Sale type, all cash transaction. $320,000. Paid in full. I felt my stomach drop into my shoes. I gripped the rough brick pillar next to me. The cold seeped into my palms. I couldn't breathe. My mind snapped back to 5 years ago. I was standing at my marble kitchen island. Langston was wearing his charcoal-tailored suit. His tie was undone. He was sobbing into his hands. He told me a massive real estate investment had collapsed. $300,000. Gone. Just like that. I had held him. I kissed his forehead. I told him we would rebuild. I told him I built this from the ground up and we would survive. The math didn't make sense back then. It made perfect sense right now. He didn't lose our money. He bought his mistress a luxury craftsman house. I locked my phone screen. I shoved it deep into my coat pocket. I reached out and pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed inside the warm house. I waited. 10 seconds passed, then 20. I heard bare feet padding on hardwood floors. The brass deadbolt clicked. The heavy oak door swung inward. There she was, Catalina. She wasn't wearing a cheap beige trench coat anymore. She was wearing an oversized gray Georgetown sweatshirt. Langston's favorite college sweatshirt. The sleeves were pushed up past her elbows. The familiar smell of his cedar cologne washed over me. It made me want to vomit right there on the mat. I braced myself for her to scream. I expected pure panic. I expected her to slam the heavy door in my face. She didn't. She just stood there in the brightly lit entryway. She crossed her arms over her chest. She looked at me. It wasn't hatred in her dark eyes. It was pity. She sighed heavily. Her shoulders slumped. She looked utterly exhausted. "Nayla," she said. Her voice was perfectly calm. "You have to stop doing this." I froze. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I couldn't form a single word. "You can't keep showing up at my house," she said. "You're scaring Mateo." I just stared at her face. "Langston already told you," she continued. "It's over." She stepped closer to the thin screen door. "You need to stop stalking us. You're just making this harder." My brain felt like pure static. I gripped the cold metal handle of the screen door. "You need to accept it," she said. "You're his ex-wife. Just sign the damn divorce papers." The silence on that porch was absolutely deafening. The doorbell camera was still recording. It captured the exact second my entire reality fractured. 3 years of his late nights, 6 years of Blake's embezzlement, 9 years of secret child support, a fake stolen Mercedes, a cash bought house, and now this. He had told her we were divorced. He had been telling her that for years. I didn't yell. I didn't scream. I just looked at her and said, "Catalina, what divorce papers?" And that's when she invited me inside. I stepped over the welcome mat and walked right into my husband's second life. It was exactly 8:02 a.m. The heavy custom oak door clicked shut behind me. The sound echoed in the quiet space. The air inside smelled like cinnamon and expensive espresso. My stomach violently turned over. Somewhere upstairs, a television was playing cartoons. I could hear the faint, high-pitched sound of a child laughing. Mateo. He was right above my head. My chest tightened so hard I couldn't pull in a breath. Catalina led me down a short, brightly lit entryway. Her bare feet made soft slapping sounds. I followed her into the living room. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life. The room was stunning. It had vaulted ceilings, massive windows, and a towering stone fireplace. My eyes immediately locked onto the mantel. There was a silver 8x10 frame sitting dead center. I walked straight over to it. My hands were perfectly steady as I picked it up. I know exactly what time it was. It was 8:15 a.m. I caught my reflection in the dark screen of a television. I looked like a stranger. I stared at the glossy picture behind the glass. It was Langston. He was wearing a crisp white linen suit. He was standing on a beautiful white sand beach. He was kissing Catalina. My eyes zoomed in on his left wrist. The sun was catching a piece of metal. He was wearing a heavy gold watch. It was the exact same Rolex I bought him for his 40th birthday. I looked at the bottom of the silver frame. There was an engraving etched into the metal. It read, Cabo San Lucas, October 12th, 2016. 7 years ago, my brain snapped back to that exact week. I remembered standing at the Delta drop-off lane. I remembered the smell of jet fuel and exhaust. I had kissed him goodbye on the curb. He told me he was going on a medical relief trip. Doctors Without Borders. He packed a duffel bag full of scrubs. He wasn't saving lives in Mexico. He was getting married to her. Catalina was standing right behind me. I could hear her breathing. I turned around and looked at her. I asked, "How long have you been married?" She crossed her arms over her sweatshirt. She looked at me with pure, exhausting pity, like I was a sick animal. She said, 7 years, you know that, Nyla. I just stood there on the Persian rug. The floor felt like it was tilting. She sighed heavily. She said, Langston told me you were having another episode. He said you refused to sign papers. A decade. He had been spinning this lie for a decade. He convinced this woman that I was his mentally unstable, bitterly obsessed, estranged wife. He told her we had been separated for 10 years. The math didn't make sense. I'd built this from the ground up using cold, hard facts. Now I needed them. I looked her dead in the eye. I said, Catalina, Langston and I were never separated. We sleep in the same bed every single night. Her face dropped. The pity vanished from her eyes. Her hands started trembling against her sides. She shook her head aggressively. She said, Stop lying. You warned me you would say things. She marched over to the massive marble kitchen island. I followed her. The cold stone felt smooth under my fingertips. I noticed a small indoor security camera. It was pointing right at us. Would you have kept your composure? Because I wanted to burn the house down, but I didn't. She opened a heavy oak drawer. She pulled out a thick manila folder. She slammed it down on the marble counter. She pulled out a certificate to prove it. She slid a copy of her marriage certificate across the counter. And right there, on the witness line, was a signature I knew better than my own. I stared at the blue ink on the thick paper. My brain simply stopped processing oxygen. I was standing at Catalina's massive marble kitchen island. The marriage certificate was laying flat between us. It was an official Mexican document. The text was translated into English. The date read October 12, 2016. The location was Cabo San Lucas. There was a line at the bottom for witness 1. The signature was a distinct looping cursive. I knew that handwriting better than my own. I see it on my firm's payroll checks every 2 weeks. It was Blythe Sinclair, my business partner, my best friend of 20 years. I gripped the edge of the cold granite counter. I squeezed the stone so hard my fingernails turned stark white. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like it was caving in. I glanced up. The small indoor security camera was still blinking red. It was recording me suffocating in real time. The timestamp on my watch said 8:20 a.m. Catalina poured me a glass of water from the fridge. She slid the crystal glass across the island. She looked at me with genuine, gentle concern. "Are you okay?" she asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I couldn't speak. I just pointed a shaking finger at the blue ink. I forced the words out. I asked her whose signature that was. Catalina smiled. It was a warm, fond smile. "Oh, that's Auntie Blythe," she said. "Langston's best friend from work." My stomach dropped through the floor. The brightly lit kitchen started spinning. I had to lean my entire body weight against the island. "She's wonderful," Catalina continued. She wiped a spot of water off the marble. "She visits us all the time. She even helped me pick out the paint for Mateo's nursery." 7 years ago, October 2016, I was sitting in my home office. Blythe came in holding a vanilla latte. She sat on my sofa. She told me she booked a solo spa retreat to Cabo. She needed to heal from a breakup. I felt so bad for her. I paid for her first-class flight upgrade. I hugged her at the airport. I told her to drink a margarita for me. She wasn't at a spa. She was in Mexico. She was watching my husband marry another woman. Have you ever realized your entire reality was carefully constructed? Blythe didn't just cover for his late nights. She was a foundational pillar of this entire lie. She helped decorate the nursery. She wore the matching solid gold Cartier cuffs. The math was finally making sense. But the math was pure evil. Blythe handles all our firm's vendor payments. Blythe set up Apex Consulting LLC. Catalina Rojas is the registered agent. Langston bought this Decatur house in cash for $300,000. Blythe had been siphoning exactly that amount from my life's work. I picked up the glass of water. My teeth chattered against the rim. The cold water spilled down my silk blouse. I didn't even care. Catalina was watching me closely. She crossed her arms over her oversized Georgetown sweatshirt. The same sweatshirt I bought Langston for Christmas. "Langston said you two had a really messy separation," she said. Blythe confirmed it. "She told me you refused to let go. She said you were unstable." They had a script, a heavily rehearsed, decade-long script. Blythe was the character witness. She validated Langston's lies to Catalina. She validated Langston's lies to me. She played both sides. She kept us entirely separate, and she got rich doing it. The Decatur house smelled like fresh coffee. It smelled like a real home, because it was a real home, built with my stolen money. I set the glass down. I looked at the little red bicycle parked by the back patio door. I thought about the architectural firm I built from the ground up. I thought about my bank accounts. Every single invoice Blythe ever touched was suddenly a crime scene. I let the thief hold the keys. I didn't just have a cheating husband. I had a parasite in my home and my business. And they had been feeding on me together. Catalina just stood there in her massive kitchen. She was waiting for me to explain. She wanted to know why the name Blythe Sinclair made me stop breathing. I couldn't form the words. My throat felt like it was closing up. I looked up at the corner of the ceiling. The little indoor security camera was still blinking red. It was recording my entire mental collapse. I pointed a trembling finger at the lens. "I have to go," I whispered. My voice didn't even sound like mine. It sounded hollow. Catalina reached out toward me. Her hand brushed my coat sleeve. "Wait, what about the divorce papers?" I didn't answer her. I couldn't look at her anymore. I turned around and walked straight out the heavy oak front door. I left it wide open behind me. I practically ran to my car. My designer heels clicked frantically against the concrete driveway. The morning air was freezing. I threw myself into the driver's seat and locked the doors. It was 8:45 a.m. I drove exactly 2 blocks down Elmwood Drive before my hands gave out. They were shaking uncontrollably. I pulled over to the curb. I slammed the gear shift into park. The engine was still running. The dash cam on my windshield blinked a steady green light. It was recording every ragged breath I took in that driver's seat. Tears were finally spilling over my cheeks. Hot, angry tears that tasted like salt and ruined mascara. I gripped my phone so hard my knuckles turned white. I needed to know the logistics. The math didn't make sense. How do you hide a second family for a decade? I opened the settings on my phone. We shared an AT&T family data plan. I navigated to the Google Maps timeline feature. I had never checked it before. Why would I ever check it? I trusted my husband completely. I typed in Langston's number and hit enter. The screen loaded slowly. A digital map of Atlanta filled my screen. I zoomed in on Decatur. A dense cluster of red location dots covered the screen. They were all pinned right over 402 Elmwood Drive. I filtered the dates on the calendar. Every Tuesday, every Thursday, alternating weekends. The pattern was flawless. It stretched back for years. My chest physically ached. I leaned my head against the cold leather steering wheel. I opened a new browser tab. I pulled up his hospital schedule from the shared family calendar. Langston was the senior attending physician. He always told me he had to take the dreaded night shifts. I cross-referenced his hospital schedule with the red dots on the map. The dates lined up perfectly. Every single on-call night was spent in Decatur. He hasn't actually worked a night shift in 6 years. 6 entire years of lies. My mind dragged me back to a Tuesday evening 6 months ago. It was 8 p.m. We were standing in our brightly lit foyer. Langston was wearing his dark green scrubs. He smelled like cedar cologne and peppermint gum. He kissed my forehead gently. He complained about the hospital administration. He told me he hated leaving me alone in the big house. Then he walked out my custom oak door. He got into his car and drove 20 minutes to his second wife. Have you ever felt your own heart actually break? It isn't just a metaphor. It feels like a physical tearing behind your ribs. I sat in that parked car and sobbed until I choked. The man I loved was a ghost. My husband didn't exist. He was spending 3 nights a week in a luxury craftsman home. He was reading bedtime stories to a little boy named Mateo. He was eating breakfast at a marble kitchen island with Catalina. He funded it all with money stolen from my firm. I built this from the ground up. I wet my face with the back of my hand. The grief was suffocating. The air in the car felt thin, but the rage was keeping me alive. He wasn't just cheating. He had built an entire parallel universe. But what I needed to know was why Blythe, my sister, in every way that mattered, helped him build it. My car engine was still running on Elmwood Drive. The AC was blasting cold air against my face. I gripped the leather steering wheel. My knuckles were completely white. I had just walked out of my husband's secret second home. But my brain wasn't on Langston anymore. It was on Blythe. I needed to know why. Why did my sister, in every way that mattered, help him build a parallel universe? I threw the car into drive. I didn't go back to my empty house. I drove straight to my architecture firm on Peachtree Street. The Sunday morning traffic was non-existent. I pulled into our private lot. It was completely empty. I unlocked the heavy glass front doors. The lobby was dead silent. The air smelled like stale coffee and expensive plotting paper. I walked straight down the dark hallway. I went directly to Blythe's workspace. It was exactly 9:12 a.m. I know because I stared at the blinking red light of our indoor security camera. It was mounted right above her pristine glass desk. It was recording me sitting down in her expensive ergonomic chair. I booted up her dual monitors. The screens cast a harsh blue glow across the dark room. Blythe always locked her workstation. She thought her clever little passwords kept her safe. But I built this firm from the ground up. I am the senior partner. I own the servers. I have master administrative access to every single terminal in this building. I bypassed her security prompt in 30 seconds. I opened her primary work email client. My hands were shaking so hard I kept hitting the wrong keys. I clicked on the search bar. I typed in 2 words, Apex Consulting. The system loaded for a second. Nothing came up. She was too smart to use the shell company name here. I tried again. I typed Langston. The screen populated with hundreds of mundane forwarded messages. Dinner reservations, group gifts, nothing incriminating. I needed to dig deeper. I narrowed the search parameters. I added Catalina to the filter. I hit enter. One single email thread appeared. It was buried deep in a hidden archived folder from 3 years ago. The subject line read, monthly deposit. I clicked it. I felt my heartbeat pounding in my throat. It was a direct exchange between my husband and my business partner. I leaned closer to the monitor. I read Blythe's message out loud to the empty room. She wrote, I processed the 4.5K to Catalina. Then came the next line. Don't forget my 3K processing fee or Nyla sees the Cabo photos. I froze. The office felt like an icebox. A processing fee. Hush money. I read the glowing words again and again. The math didn't make sense. If she took $3,000 every month for 7 years, how much had she stolen in total? Over $250,000 just for keeping her mouth shut? My stomach violently dropped. A sick memory hit me like a physical blow. 8 years ago, we were sitting at my marble kitchen island. Blythe was sobbing into a mug of vanilla latte. She had confessed to a massive gambling problem. She was drowning in casino credit card debt. I bailed her out. I wrote a massive personal check to save her life. She swore she was done with the tables. She wasn't done. She just found a new game to play. And my cheating husband was her winning ticket. Suddenly, the surprise party crashed back into my mind. The spilled crystal glass of red wine. Blythe physically throwing herself between me and Langston's phone. I thought she was just being clumsy. I was so incredibly blind. She wasn't protecting Langston's secret because she cared about him. She was protecting her own extortion scheme. If Langston's double life exploded, her monthly payout stopped. I sat alone in the dark office. The monitor illuminated my grim reflection in the glass desk. I finally understood that panicked look they shared at the front door. Blythe wasn't just covering for him. She was blackmailing him. And the worst part, she was using my own company's money to pay herself the hush money. I didn't just stare at that extortion email. I pulled out my phone and took 14 clear photos. My hands were shaking so hard the first 3 were blurry. I deleted them and tried again. I hit the print command on Blythe's keyboard. The heavy laser printer in the corner hummed to life. It spat out the hard copy of Blythe's blackmail. I snatched it up. I folded the warm paper and shoved it deep into my coat pocket. The evidence was secured. But I needed the full picture. I walked over to my drafting table and pulled up the firm's master ledger. It was 9:30 a.m. on a Sunday. The office was dead silent except for the hum of the AC. I opened a blank spreadsheet on my dual monitors. I started cross-referencing every single invoice paid to Apex Consulting. The math didn't make sense at first. I had to dig deeper into Blythe's vendor payout histories. I pulled up 6 years of archived bank statements. Line by line, the numbers formed a noose. I found the 6 years of fake consulting fees. They were funneled straight to Catalina's household in Decatur. That was the $320,000 used to buy the house. But that wasn't all. I kept scrolling through the outgoing wire logs. I found a secondary recurring transfer of $3,000 every single month. It was routed to an offshore account in the Caymans, Blythe's processing fee, her hush money for keeping Langston's Cabo wedding a secret. 72 months of silence. $216,000 in pure extortion. I highlighted the final column and hit the auto-sum button. The number flashed bright white on my monitor. $536,000. Over $500,000 stolen from my firm's bank accounts. My stomach violently dropped. I tasted metallic bile in the back of my throat because I suddenly realized exactly how Blythe had hidden it. She didn't just steal the cash. She wrote every single dime off as a deductible business expense. A memory hit me like a physical blow. Every April, we sat at this exact glass desk. The room always smelled strongly of her iced vanilla latte. She would slide a thick stack of tax documents. Little neon yellow sticky notes flagged the signature lines. She would tap her perfectly manicured nail on the paper. She would smile and say, "Just sign here, babe." And I did. I signed my name under my master architecture license. I trusted my best friend. I co-signed $500,000 in felony tax fraud. I pushed back from the desk so hard. My expensive ergonomic chair slammed into the drywall. I stood up. I started pacing the length of my office. It was 10:30 a.m. I looked up at the corner of the ceiling. The little red light on our indoor security camera was blinking. It was recording me completely losing my mind. I was dragging both hands through my locks. I was pulling at the roots so hard my scalp burned. I felt like a trapped animal in a cage I'd built myself. You know that feeling when the floor vanishes? If I did what any normal betrayed wife would do, I was dead. If I hired a divorce attorney tomorrow, they would demand forensic accounting. The auditors would tear through my firm's bank accounts. They would find the fake LLC. They would find the offshore transfers. And the IRS wouldn't care that my husband was sleeping with another woman. They wouldn't care about the secret boy. They would only care whose signature was on those fraudulent tax returns. Mine. Blythe had engineered the perfect insurance policy. Exposing Langston meant exposing her. Exposing her meant destroying my own life. I would lose my architecture license. I would lose my firm. I would literally go to federal prison. I stopped pacing. I pressed my hot forehead against the cold window. I stared down at the empty Peachtree Street traffic below. The frantic panic inside me suddenly stopped. The rage crystallized into something ice cold and terrifying. I couldn't just leave him. If I blew this up the normal way, I would lose everything. I had to surgically extract them both. I had the money trail. I had the printed blackmail emails. But I still didn't understand the timeline. Why did Catalina show up at my house last night? I was still sitting at Blythe's pristine glass desk. The printed extortion email was heavy in my coat pocket. The firm was dead silent. The air conditioning hummed softly above me. It was almost 11 on Sunday morning. My brain was vibrating with a sickening clarity. I needed to see Langston's exact movements from yesterday. I reached down into my leather tote bag on the floor. I had grabbed Langston's silver iPad from his nightstand. He always kept his iCloud synced across all his Apple devices. He thought he was so incredibly smart. He wasn't. I set the cold metal tablet on the glass desk. I tapped the screen to wake it up. It asked for a passcode. I typed in 1012, October 12th, Mateo's birthday. The screen unlocked instantly. My stomach performed a slow, sickening flip. I opened the green iMessage icon. I scrolled down his recent chats. I found the number saved as CR Emergency. Catalina. I pulled up their text thread from yesterday, the day of my perfectly planned surprise party. Suddenly, a vivid memory from yesterday afternoon hit me. Langston had been pacing our upstairs hallway. He was sweating through his tailored charcoal suit. I could smell his expensive cedar cologne. He kept checking his heavy gold Rolex. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He told me we needed to talk about something serious when he got home. I thought he had lost a patient. I had rubbed his arm. I told him I loved him. He kissed my forehead and walked out the door. I looked back down at the bright screen. The truth was staring right at me. He wasn't nervous about losing a patient. He was preparing to end our 20-year marriage. I read his text from 4:30 p.m. The blue bubble was a death warrant. It said, "I'm doing it tonight." I took a jagged breath. My chest felt tight. The next text made my blood turn to ice. By 8 p.m., she'll be out of our lives. My hands started shaking violently. I had to grip the cold edge of the glass desk. I read Catalina's gray reply from 4:35 p.m. "I'm coming over to support you." A second text followed immediately. "We're a family." I closed my eyes. The math finally made sense. All of it. Catalina didn't come to my house to crash a birthday party. She didn't even know it was his 50th birthday. She came to watch him hand me divorce papers. She thought she was the supportive, loving wife. She was standing by her man during a difficult transition. I dropped the silver iPad onto the glass desk. The loud smack echoed through the empty architecture firm. I leaned back in Blythe's expensive ergonomic chair. I stared up at the acoustic ceiling tiles. The hidden security camera in the corner captured the entire thing. The timestamp in the footage read exactly 11:15 a.m. It recorded a dark, humorless smile spreading across my face. I couldn't stop it. The absolute audacity of this man. Blythe had orchestrated a $500,000 embezzlement scheme. She funneled my firm's money through Apex Consulting. She used it to buy Langston's secret Decatur house in cash. Then she charged him hush money. She disguised every single stolen dime as deductible business expenses. I remembered her handing me those tax files. I had signed those fraudulent tax returns under my master architecture license. If I called the police right now, the IRS would investigate. They would find the fraudulent deductions. I would lose my firm. I would lose my professional license. I would be the one going to prison. They had built the perfect cage. I was trapped inside my own success. I couldn't use standard legal channels. I couldn't just serve him papers and walk away. They would destroy everything I built. I had to surgically extract them both. I had to do it today. I picked up the iPad again. I looked at his pathetic, arrogant text message one last time. He wasn't a victim of a crazy mistress. He was planning to throw me away like trash. So I decided to take out the garbage myself. I locked the glass doors of my firm at exactly 11:30 a.m. The silver iPad felt heavy in my leather tote bag. I walked to my car in the private lot. The clock was ticking. Banks open at 9 o'clock on Monday morning. I had less than 22 hours to execute my extraction. I drove straight back to our house in Atlanta. I pulled into the concrete driveway just after noon. The house was suffocatingly quiet. I pushed open the custom oak front door. Langston was sitting on the edge of the custom velvet sofa. He looked like a beaten dog. His head was buried in his hands. His tailored charcoal suit jacket was crumpled on the Persian rug. Seeing that jacket made my stomach turn. I finally understood why he wore it to his own surprise party. He had told me his big afternoon meeting ran late. It was a complete lie. He was dressed up because he had just come from an anniversary lunch. A celebratory romantic lunch with Catalina. He had promised her our marriage was over. He planned to serve me divorce papers on his 50th birthday. Catalina didn't crash the party out of malice or jealousy. She showed up to support her husband during a difficult breakup. The sheer ruthlessness of it almost knocked the wind out of me. But I couldn't show him my rage. I had to play the desperate, heartbroken wife. I dropped my car keys onto the marble console table. The heavy brass keys hit the stone with a sharp clatter. Langston flinched and looked up. His eyes were red and bloodshot. I let my shoulders slump forward. I forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged. I let the tears spill down my cheeks. They were real tears. But I wasn't crying over a broken marriage. I was mourning the $500,000 stolen from my life's work. Langston stood up slowly from the sofa. He gave me this pathetic, pleading look. His deep brown eyes went wide and soft. It was the exact same look he gave me 12 years ago. We were standing in our old, brightly lit foyer. I had caught him lying about a weekend golf trip to Florida. He used those puppy dog eyes to manipulate me back then. I forgave him in less than 5 minutes. He thought that same tired trick would work right now. "Nayla, please," he whispered. His voice was cracked and completely dry. "It meant nothing," he lied. I walked slowly over to him. My designer heels clicked heavily against the hardwood floor. I reached into my leather tote bag. I pulled out a folded piece of printer paper. I handed it to him with a violently trembling hand. It was a printed receipt, a confirmation for a couples therapy retreat in Sedona. I had booked it from my phone in the driveway. The retreat was scheduled for next month. It was an expensive, non-refundable decoy. "We can fix this," I choked out, wiping my wet face. "But you have to cut her off completely." Langston stared down at the receipt in his trembling hands. I watched his chest heave with a massive sigh of relief. He genuinely believed he was safe. He thought he had successfully manipulated his hysterical wife. He stepped forward and wrapped his arms tightly around me. It was exactly 1:30 p.m. The hidden living room security camera recorded the entire embrace. He buried his face deep into my neck. I smelled his expensive cedar cologne. Physical revulsion crawled up my spine like ice water. My skin crawled where his hands touched my back. But I didn't pull away. I just stood there letting him hold me. On the camera footage, my eyes are wide open. I'm staring coldly at the blank drywall behind him. I let him stroke my hair. I let him whisper broken apologies into my ear. He kissed my forehead, and thank God for my grace. He had no idea I had just texted our lawyer to draft a very specific legal document. I left Langston standing in our foyer, completely convinced he had won. I kissed his cheek. I told him I needed to clear my head. His tailored charcoal suit smelled like cedar and lies. I walked out the custom oak front door. My hands were perfectly steady. I had his silver iPad tucked inside my leather tote bag. He wouldn't notice it missing until tomorrow. By then, it wouldn't matter. I got into my car and locked the doors. The leather steering wheel was burning hot against my palms. I drove straight back to my architecture firm. It was 2:45 p.m. on a Sunday. The private lot was completely empty. The afternoon sun was glaring off the glass facade of our building. I walked into the lobby. I went straight to my office. I sat at my pristine glass desk. I pulled out my phone and opened my messages. I sent Blythe a single text. Emergency partner meeting. 3:30 p.m. Now. I needed to secure my company before the banks opened. I couldn't let her touch those accounts again. I had less than 18 hours to sever her. I walked down the hall into the main conference room. The acoustic ceiling tiles hummed quietly above me. The room smelled like lemon polish and stale coffee. I placed a thick manila folder on the table. Looking around that room, memory hit me like a physical blow. 20 years ago, it was drywall. Blythe and I painted these exact walls ourselves. We sat on the floor, covered in cheap white primer. We clinked plastic cups full of cheap champagne. We were exhausted, broke, and terrified. But we promised we would build an empire together. The math didn't make sense back then either. But we made it work. I built this from the ground up. I poured my blood and sweat. And she used it to fund my husband's secret family. She used my work as her personal casino. At exactly 3:42 p.m., the heavy glass front doors chimed. I heard the sharp click of designer heels. Blythe walked into the conference room. She was wearing a beige silk blouse and a nervous smile. She rushed toward me. She reached out her arms to hug me. I took a deliberate step back. My spine hit the edge of the oak table. Her arms dropped awkwardly to her sides. The solid gold Cartier cuff clinked against her expensive watch. It was the exact matching bracelet Langston bought, the physical proof of their sickening alliance. She looked at my face and swallowed hard. She asked, "Nayla, sweetie, how are you holding up?" Her voice was shaking just a little bit. She was trying so hard to play the supportive best friend. I didn't answer her. I walked past her to the heavy wooden door. I grabbed the brass handle and pulled it shut. I turned the deadbolt until it clicked loudly in the silent room. Blythe flinched. Her pale blue eyes darted to the locked door, her breathing hitched. She knew something was horribly wrong. I walked back to the table. I tapped my fingernail against the thick manila folder. I slid it across the polished wood until it hit her fingertips. I looked her dead in the eye. I said, "Open it." Her trembling fingers pulled back the paper flap. She pulled out a stack of crisp white legal documents. It was the specific paperwork from my lawyer. The bold black header read, "Confession of Embezzlement and Transfer of Shares Agreement." It was perfectly, ruthlessly, legally binding. It detailed every single fraudulent tax return she filed. It listed the $320,000 cash purchase of the Decatur house. It documented the offshore Cayman bank account. It outlined the $3,000 monthly extortion fee, the exact processing fee she charged my husband. Over $500,000 stolen directly from my firm over 6 years. I watched her read it. I said, "You own 40% of this firm, Blythe." My voice was a tight, breathless whisper. "By 9 a.m. tomorrow, you will own 0. The contract signed over her entire stake to me. The purchase price was listed as exactly $1. I leaned across the table. I could smell her expensive vanilla perfume. I said, "You sign this or I go to the FBI." I glanced up at the corner of the ceiling. The indoor security camera was blinking red. The camera captured her confident posture crumbling in real time. Her shoulders collapsed inward. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and gray. She dropped the heavy legal papers onto the table. I felt a dark, satisfying vindication blooming. It felt like breathing pure oxygen after drowning for days. She thought she was the architect. Blythe looked up at me, her pale blue eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "You wouldn't destroy me." I slid a black ink pen across the table and smiled. Blythe didn't touch the pen. She just stared at it. The black ink was practically glowing against the polished oak table. The deadbolt on the conference room door clicked loudly in the silence. We were completely alone. It was Sunday afternoon and the office was a tomb. Blythe crossed her arms defensively. Her solid gold Cartier cuff clinked against her expensive watch. She leaned back in her ergonomic chair and laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound that made my skin crawl. "You're out of your mind, Nayla," she said. "You can't do this." I didn't blink. I just tapped the crisp white legal document. The Confession of Embezzlement and Transfer of Shares Agreement. Blythe leaned forward, her face turning red with sudden anger. "If I go down for tax fraud, you go down too." She pointed a manicured finger directly at my chest. "You signed those returns as the master architect. You're legally liable for every dime." She smiled, thinking she had me perfectly cornered. "The IRS will strip your license. You'll go to federal prison right next to me." My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears, but my hands were perfectly steady. I reached into my leather tote bag. I pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it next to the pen. It was a printed screenshot, a transaction log showing Blythe's offshore money transfers. I tapped the paper with my manicured nail. "The memo line just says consulting," I told her calmly. "But the IP address traces directly to a Cayman Islands casino." Blythe's smug smile vanished instantly, the color completely drained from her face. She looked like she was going to be physically sick. "I already spoke to my lawyer," I whispered, "and I hired a forensic accountant. I leaned across the glass table. I wanted her to smell my vanilla perfume. I filed an amended tax return this morning. I watched her eyes widen in pure, unadulterated terror. I flagged every single Apex Consulting payment as unauthorized fraud. I pulled out the printed blackmail email I had found earlier. Committed solely by you, I added. My mind flashed back to a Tuesday morning a decade ago. We were standing in the upstairs hallway of our old office. Blythe had warned me about a shady contractor we hired. Always get everything in writing, Nayla, she had said, because people will screw you over. It was almost funny now. I had taken her advice to heart. I had 6 years of her extortion emails in writing. I had the exact proof of her stealing my money to fund Langston's double life. You have no leverage, Blight, I said. The IRS already knows. The FBI will know by tomorrow morning. I looked at the heavy brass clock on the wall. It was 3:58 p.m. Unless you sign that paper right now. The room smelled like stale coffee and cold sweat. Blythe was shaking violently. Sign over your 40%, I demanded. Give me back my firm. I pushed the black pen closer to her trembling hand, or I walk out that door and call the authorities. She looked at the deadbolt. She looked at the security camera in the corner of the ceiling. She knew it was recording every single second of this. It took her 14 minutes to break. At exactly 4:12 p.m., the conference room security camera captured it all. Blythe picked up the black ink pen. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold it steady. She signed her distinct cursive signature on the bottom line. She signed away her entire life's work. She threw the pen across the room. It bounced hard off the drywall. She grabbed her designer purse and practically ran for the heavy wooden door. She fumbled with the deadbolt with trembling fingers. The brass lock finally clicked open. She didn't look back once. A minute later, the heavy glass front doors slammed shut downstairs. The sound echoed through the empty lobby. I stood alone in the main conference room. I let out a massive, shuddering breath. My knees finally buckled beneath me. I sank into the expensive leather chair. The cancer was out. The parasite was completely gone from my building. I pulled the signed agreement toward me across the glass desk. The paper was still warm from her hand. I owned my firm 100%. My business was safe. Now it was time to take care of my husband. I walked out of the firm's glass doors at 4:30 p.m. The signed confession of embezzlement was locked securely in my briefcase. The afternoon sun was blinding against the pavement. I drove straight back to the Buckhead house. The leather steering wheel felt hot under my palms. I pulled into our empty driveway. The house was dead quiet. The air conditioning hummed faintly from the ceiling vents. I unlocked the custom oak front door. The lingering smell of stale vanilla cake from Friday night hit me instantly. My stomach violently turned. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. I walked straight past the living room. I climbed the hardwood stairs to the master bedroom. I pulled exactly 2 black leather suitcases from the closet. My hands were perfectly steady. I wasn't crying. I was operating on pure cold adrenaline. I packed only my essential clothes. I left every expensive dress he ever bought me hanging on the rack. I let the designer jewelry in the safe. I zipped the bag shut. The metal zipper sounded loud in the silent room. I stood there staring at the heavy oak bedroom door. A memory flashed behind my tired eyes. 15 years ago, we moved into this exact house. Langston actually carried me over the threshold. He kissed my forehead and promised me a beautiful life. I remembered the bittersweet feeling of leaving our old apartment. It was a flawless performance. The entire marriage was just a stage play. I sat down on my glass vanity table. I flipped open my laptop. The screen illuminated my face. I logged into our legitimate joint Chase bank accounts. For years, the math didn't make sense. Now everything was crystal clear. I typed in my private account routing number. I initiated a massive wire transfer. I moved exactly 50% of the funds. I legally took my exact half down to the penny. I built this from the ground up. I wasn't leaving him a single dime of my money. The transaction confirmation popped up in bright green text. Then I picked up my phone. I dialed the administrative line for Atlanta General Hospital. The automated voice clicked on. I navigated to the chief of staff's private voicemail. I didn't give my name. My voice was a tight, breathless whisper. I reported Dr. Langston Hughes for maintaining a fraudulent identity. I reported him for bigamy. I stated that he had a secret second family in Decatur. I hung up the phone. My finger slew across the keyboard. I immediately drafted an anonymous email to the hospital's medical board. I attached the scanned PDF of the Mexican marriage certificate. I attached the Cabo wedding photo. I clicked send. The screen confirmed the delivery. His professional life was now a ticking time bomb. I grabbed my laptop and walked downstairs. I walked into the brightly lit kitchen. I stopped at the massive marble kitchen island. I unzipped my leather tote bag. I pulled out the crisp white legal document. It was the divorce petition. My lawyer had drafted it perfectly. I placed it exactly centered on the cold marble surface. The black ink looked stark against the white stone. The document cited bigamy, fraud, and severe emotional distress. It explicitly demanded full ownership of the Buckhead house. I looked down at my left hand. The diamond caught the overhead kitchen lights. 20 years of my life, represented by a piece of compressed carbon. I slid the wedding ring off my finger. The metal felt heavy and cold. I placed it directly on top of the divorce papers. It sat right over his printed name. It was the death of a 20-year illusion. I grabbed the handles of my 2 suitcases. I walked out the front door. The heavy brass lock clicked shut behind me. I dragged my luggage across the concrete driveway. The wheels rattled loudly against the pavement. The outdoor security camera recorded my every move. The timestamp on the footage read exactly 6:45 p.m. I loaded the heavy bags into the back of my SUV. I slammed the trunk shut. I didn't look back once. I climbed into the leather driver's seat. I gripped the steering wheel. My heart was pounding in my throat. I put the car in drive. I pressed the gas pedal. I drove away just as his car pulled into the neighborhood. I didn't stay to watch him find the papers because I had one last message to send. I watched Langston's headlights sweep across my rearview mirror. He was pulling into our empty driveway just as I turned the corner. My phone was sitting on the passenger seat. I picked it up. My hands were perfectly steady. I opened my text thread with Catalina. I didn't type a greeting. I didn't offer an apology. I just attached the PDF of the blackmail emails between Langston and Blythe. I hit send. The dashboard clock glowed in the dark. It read exactly 6:47 p.m. I kept my foot on the gas pedal. I drove straight down I-85 to the Four Seasons in Midtown. I handed my keys to the valet. I checked into a corner suite on the top floor. The room smelled like fresh linens and expensive lavender. The silence was absolute. I walked straight to the heavy glass balcony doors. I pushed them open and stepped outside. The cool night air hit my face. I looked down at my glowing phone screen. A tiny gray word appeared under the PDF attachment. It simply said, read. Catalina now knew the absolute truth. I stared at the tiny text message bubble. She knew Langston was stealing from my firm to fund her life. He knew he only stayed with her because Blythe was extorting him. Both of his carefully constructed worlds were burning. I poured myself a glass of water from the minibar. I sat on the edge of the king-size bed. Later that night, my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was exactly 11:30 p.m. I had secretly linked Catalina's doorbell camera to my phone while I was in her house. I opened the app. The screen showed Catalina's wide brick porch. It was pouring rain indicator. Langston was standing there in his ruined charcoal suit. He was banging his fists against her heavy oak door. His shoulders were shaking. He was completely locked out. I watched him beg the camera for 20 minutes. I didn't feel a single ounce of pity. That was exactly 3 weeks ago. I am sitting on the same hotel balcony right now. I have a crystal glass of champagne in my hand. The Atlanta skyline is glowing brightly in front of me. I am exhausted. I feel completely hollow inside. I take a slow sip of my cold champagne. I am fiercely independent. My mind keeps flashing back to that night, the surprise party, the sickeningly sweet smell of vanilla cake, the moment the lights flicked on, everyone yelling, "Surprise!" It feels entirely surreal now, a dead illusion. I set my champagne glass down on the cold metal patio table. I pick up my phone again. I open the Georgia Medical Board website. I type in Langston's license number. The page loads instantly. Right under his smiling professional headshot, the text is highlighted in bright red. It says suspended, pending investigation. The anonymous email I sent did its job perfectly. The forensic accountant took care of Blythe and the IRS. I built this from the ground up. I traced the rim of my glass with my thumb. I refused to let 2 parasites destroy my life's work. For years, the math didn't make sense. Now the ledger is completely balanced. I have my company. I have my money. I have my absolute freedom. I'm sharing this nightmare because I know I'm not the only woman who has survived this. If this story hit you, drop a like, hit that subscribe button if you want to hear more. Turn on notifications and hit that bell so you never miss an update. Please drop a comment. I really want to know. Where are you watching this from right now? What time is it there? Langston thought he had me completely fooled for a decade. He wanted a surprise for his 50th birthday. I just made sure it was one he would never ever forget.